Hey everyone, this is a brief little video lecture about the 6 main approaches to psychology talked about in your textbook. I do encourage you to read the chapter on this, as I won't be covering all of the information in this lecture, actually not even close, and some of it might show up on the first exam. But I just wanted to go through these 6 main approaches because that's what your assignment mainly deals with. So I'll talk just a little bit about each one of these. The first one is the biological approach to psychology. Now, if you were a biological psychologist, you would assume that people's behavior and the way they think is largely due to biological characteristics. This would involve things like brain structures, neurotransmitters, um, and so if you were a biological psychologist and you were working with someone who was depressed, one of the things that you would be thinking about is, I wonder if their neurotransmitters are kind of out of whack, and can we correct that with medication, or what do we need to do? Or have they suffered some kind of brain trauma that might be associated with their depression? That's kind of what you would be looking for. The second approach your book talks about is the evolutionary approach. Now, evolutionary psychologists assume that behavior and thinking are largely the result of evolution through natural selection. So we're talking about kind of Darwin's theory here, and you may or may not totally agree with that theory, but an evolutionary psychologist would say, well, the reason we do things is because over hundreds and thousands of years, from our caveman ancestors until now, those kinds of things have become adaptable in some way. They've helped humans, and so that's the reason that we do them. So, for example, when we get really angry with someone and feel like lashing out at them, an evolutionary psychologist might say, well, when cavemen anger was really functional because you had to fight for everything, and so those people that were really good fighters as cavemen passed on these traits uh, down through the generations, and now that's why we have it. So that's what they would be. Um, that's how they would try and explain things. Okay, the psychodynamic approach. Um, if there's a key word you can remember for the psychodynamic approach, it is unconscious. And I'm sure there will be an exam question about that. But psychodynamic psychologists say that human behavior is really all about our unconscious conflicts between our impulses and society's rules. So um, a psychodynamic psychologist would say, well, we all have this uh, unconscious desire uh, to hurt people, but society says we can't do that. And so unconsciously we have some kind of conflict, and that may resolve itself by uh, being displayed as anxiety or depression. And so if you went to go see treatment from one of these folks, they would be asking you a lot about your childhood, and they would be trying to get your unconscious thoughts out in the open. I'm not a huge believer in the psychodynamic approach. Um, the behavioral approach, uh, behavioral psychologists are focused on what can I observe, and if I can't observe it, then I don't really care about it. So a behavioral psychologist is not concerned with, um, they're not concerned with thoughts or unconscious conflicts. They don't care about any of that. All they care about is, what can I see? And so if they were working with someone with depression and they were trying to help them, they wouldn't be working on their thinking or anything like that. They would say, well, behaviorally, how does your depression show up? And that might be things like lack of energy, laying in bed all day, and they would say, okay, let's try and change those behaviors. And by changing that, we can change your symptoms. And they don't care about anything that they can't observably see with their own eyes. Okay. All right, the last two your book talks about. The cognitive approach, which has gotten really popular over the last 20 or 30 years, is really focuses on how is our behavior affected by the way we think. Okay, and so if someone comes in with a psychological problem, they're going to really look at how are you thinking about things. Is your thinking distorted in any way? Can we change the way you think about the problem? And maybe by changing the way you think about it, we can make the problem better. Okay. And then the final one your book talks about is the humanistic approach. Now, humanistic psychologists are kind of what I like to call touchy-feely. They think everybody is really striving to be the best person they can be, that we all have the potential to be really, really great people. And they also believe that people are the ones that are really in control of their lives. And so if someone came to a humanistic psychologist with a problem, they would say, well, I think that you have the ability to figure this problem out. What do you think you should do? How do you think you can solve it? And they would really look to the person to solve the problem rather than taking on this kind of expert role and telling the person how to handle it. Okay, so I encourage you to kind of go through your book, read a little bit more about these approaches, and you're going to see these different approaches come up periodically throughout the semester, especially again when we get into psychological treatment later on in the semester. But that's just kind of a brief overview of these things, and if you have any questions, just let me know.